Can you imagine what a mother is capable of doing for her children, even without being able to speak, eat or ask for help? This dog was abandoned with her mouth tied with tape, left to fend for herself, hungry, injured. But what she did for her defenseless puppies will destroy you inside. A real intense story that will touch everything you feel, and the ending is simply unbelievable. Take a deep breath, because what comes next is to touch the soul. Have you ever stopped to think about how far a mother's instinct can go? What if that mother is a dog, alone, hurt and silenced, but still determined to protect those born to her, even in the midst of abandonment and pain? It's hard to imagine, but this story you're about to learn has the power to change the way you see not only animals, but the very meaning of unconditional love. At first glance, no one would notice anything different about that vacant lot. It was just another forgotten space, filled with rubble, tall grass, and silence. But among the shards, torn bags, and debris, there was a presence. A pair of eyes watched, quiet, attentive. It wasn't fear, it was vigil, as someone who knows that any carelessness can cost you dearly. And there, among pieces of wood and dry leaves, she was, skinny with bones bulging beneath dry skin, fur dirty and stained with clay. But what caught the most attention was his look. It was impossible not to notice the strength in that dog's eyes. A strange glow that mixed pain and resistance, suffering and courage. She didn't bark, he didn't growl, he didn't beg for food. And yet, his silence said it all. The duct tape around the muzzle was a cruel sentence, thick, tight, glued with anger. She was literally prevented from asking for help, fending off threats or eating. But even with her mouth sealed, she wasn't in despair for herself. His thin body did not move to seek help. He didn't try to rip the tape off with his paws. She didn't think about herself. I thought about them. There, curled up beside her, were her puppies, 4 fragile little bulls, with their eyes still half closed, stumbling over each other in search of the warmth of their mother's body. The weakest of them could barely stand. Another was crying softly, in an almost imperceptible moan. It was for them that she resisted. It was for them that she endured the pain, fear, and hunger. That mother, even when silenced, continued to communicate with the only language she knew, that of unshakable love. She licked each one gently, as if apologizing for not being able to offer more, as if to say, "I'm here, I'm not going to leave you." From time to time, even though she was exhausted, she would get up and take small turns around. With its snout stuck, it dug the earth with its paws, perhaps looking for a piece of food, a root, anything that could sustain the little ones. He always came back in a hurry, as if the entire world represented a threat, except that patch of ground where his puppies slept. Can you imagine what was going on inside her? The constant fear of not being able to protect your children, the physical pain of hunger and a sore mouth, the feeling of powerlessness. And yet, she didn't abandon them. She didn't push them away. She didn't surrender. How many of us in extreme situations would have that same courage? Whoever saw it for the first time thought it was a wild animal. It was so still, so protected behind the rubble, that it seemed like a shadow among the forgotten objects. But when their eyes met, there was no doubt there was someone there, a being who felt, who suffered, who silently begged for help, not for you, but for those he loved. And it was that look that changed everything. The person who found her, a local resident, later said he would never forget it. "It was as if she was screaming without a sound," he said. And as he approached, the shock was immediate. That tape tightening the snout. The scene was too cruel to even be real. But it was. It was real, and it was there in front of him. The dog did not react violently. He didn't growl, he didn't try to run away. She stood still, with her eyes fixed, as if she no longer had the strength to fight, but still had something more powerful: faith. Faith that this time someone would look at her and not turn away. Faith that perhaps this was the chance to save her children. From here, the story changes tone. But let's not talk about happy endings yet. Not yet. Because before any miracle, there was a struggle. There was resistance. There were proofs of love that surpass what any words can describe. This dog didn't know anyone was coming, but even without knowing it, he chose to love. And love with the purest and bravest dedication. And do you know what catches your attention the most? She didn't do this expecting recognition. I didn't want a comfortable home or a warm bed. She just wanted her cubs to survive, and that was enough to keep his heart beating, no matter how weak he was. Now tell me, how many times have you seen this kind of love in a human's eyes? How many times has someone given their all without expecting anything in return? This dog's story touches so deeply because she is a mirror of what we most seek: true loyalty, love without conditions, courage in the face of the impossible. And she, even forgotten in a corner of the world, was all of that. Alone, wounded, silent. But like every story of someone who truly loves, life still has something more in store for her. Something that begins to take shape at the exact moment that gaze met another gaze, the one who saw beyond the dirt and pain the soul of a mother, a warrior, a survivor. And maybe this story is just beginning. Because what happens next you need to see with your own eyes, and when you see it, you won't be able to forget it. Because there are stories that we hear with our ears, but there are others, like this one, that we feel with our soul. If you're feeling your heart sink, wait until you see what comes next, because when the truth appears, it transforms, and what this dog will reveal, even without a single word, will change everything. This story moved you, right? It's impossible to go through all this and come out unscathed. Anyone who truly feels it understands the power of love that this dog showed. Pure love, which endures even when everything is lacking. And look, only those who have a heart that beats strong for stories like this understand the value of every second of this video. Here is a place for those who are moved, for those who believe that animals have something to teach, for those who value real stories that touch us deep down. Be part of this family that loves deeply, that vibrates, that cries, and that believes in good. Press the like now to show that you are here for love, and take advantage of this subscribe to the channel, because there are a lot of intense and true stories coming. Have you ever noticed how some places seem to carry a sadness that goes beyond what the eyes can see? Sometimes the silence of a space speaks louder than any scream. And it was exactly this silence that enveloped that vacant lot, a forgotten corner of the city where time seemed to have stopped. There was no movement, there was no color, there was no life, at least at first glance. But looking more closely, it was possible to notice something. A small tremor in the dry leaves, a muffled sound, almost like crying that I didn't want to be heard. It was as if the environment itself was trying to hide an ancient pain, buried beneath layers of trash, dust, and abandonment. And there, among pieces of rubble and rotten wood, among old tires and torn bags, an unlikely nest was formed. In the midst of all that desolation, a scene pulsed in silence. The mother was there. His thin body, curled up among the rubble, could barely support the weight of his own bones. Breathing was short, painful, but there was something stronger than the pain, something more urgent than hunger. There were the eyes. Her eyes were alive, watchers. They looked around as if measuring danger with precision, but they also carried a tender, almost sacred glow every time they turned to the small bodies curled around them. Those puppies were all she had, everything that mattered. She didn't need to talk. Every movement was a gesture of care. Each slow lick was a silent promise. I'm here, and I'll take care of you, until the end. The wind that cut through the land made the leaves rustle like sad whispers. Sometimes a twig would snap in the distance, and she would stand up in alert, even though she was weak. The eyes opened wide, attentive, and the body instinctively assumed the position of guard. No matter the condition, no matter the pain, she was a mother, and mothers do not flinch in the face of danger. All around, the scenery only reinforced the contrast. Everything was ugly, dirty, gloomy. But in the center of that little makeshift shelter, there was beauty, there was love. Love that cannot be explained, it can only be felt. And anyone who has ever had a real dog knows what I'm talking about. You know how they feel. Protect. Love with an intensity that dismantles us. Every time a puppy moved, the dog adjusted itself, creating a nest with her own body, even injured, even hungry, even with her nose sore because of the tape that prevented her from barking or eating. She was completely there. Nothing in her hesitated. The priority was clear. Keep their babies alive, warm, safe. It was amazing how she knew exactly where each of them was. One look was enough for her to identify which one was cold, which one was crying because of hunger, which one needed affection. With the last of her strength, she slowly licked each person's face one by one, as if blessing, as if apologizing for not being able to offer more. And most touching, she wasn't sorry. He didn't show anger. He was not angry with the situation. It was as if she had accepted that the world could be cruel to her, but she refused to let that same world be cruel to her children. She wrapped her body around them, not just for warmth, but for protection. They snuggled into her thin belly, as if it were the safest place in the world, and in fact it was. Meanwhile, the sound of the puppies crying echoed softly, lost among the noises of the bush, and even so faint, it pierced the hearts of those who paid attention, because it wasn't just crying from hunger or cold. It was the cry of fragility, from total dependence. It was the sound of life saying, "I need you," and she listened. Every sigh that came out of that dog's body was a test of resistance. She hadn't given up. Despite everything, the pain, the loneliness, the neglect, she resisted. For them, for them. There was nothing moving her in the world other than that. And in this act of absolute love, she did something that many humans have forgotten. She chose to love, even though she was the most hurt part of the story. It's curious to think that, in a place where everyone seemed to have turned away, she chose to stay. He chose to fight. You chose to be a mother until the end. This isn't just instinct. This is heart. This is soul. It's the kind of love that brings tears to even those who swear they've seen it all. Now, take a deep breath and imagine this. A mother unable to eat, surrounded by garbage, without a voice. Literally without a voice, trying to save her own children with everything she still has, which is almost nothing. And yet she continues. Strong, gift, unbeatable. This isn't just a scene. It's a silent cry about what really matters. While the world around them continued to ignore that part of the city, something sacred happened among the broken concrete and dry leaves, a bond that no pain could break, an invisible but very strong connection that kept that little family together against all odds. And maybe, just maybe, it was this silent love that was about to change everything, because even in the shadows the light finds gaps. Even in pain, love leaves marks. And when someone finally sees it, really sees it, there's no unseeing it. The story of this warrior mother and her cubs still has a lot to show. And what lies ahead, oh, what lies ahead will affect you even more. Because what seemed like the end was actually just the beginning of something no one expected. Have you ever had the feeling that something isn't right, even though you don't know exactly what it is? That restlessness in the chest, an annoyance that appears subtly, almost like a whisper from the soul saying, "Pay attention, there's something wrong here." Sometimes it's just an intuition, but other times it's the beginning of a change. And that's more or less how everything started to change for that silent mother and her little ones. The scenario, as you already know, was one of abandonment, a vacant lot, full of rubble, with a heavy silence that was only broken by the timid sound of puppies crying. The pain was constant, but time seemed to stand still. Nothing happened. Nobody showed up. Until one cloudy late afternoon, when the sun was already beginning to hide behind the buildings and the cold wind was blowing through the dry branches, a resident of the region returning home passed closer to that land than usual. He was a simple man, used to the sounds of the street, the comings and goings of people, the daily life of the neighborhood. But that day something made him stop. It wasn't a loud noise, it wasn't a scream. It was a small, almost timid sound coming from within the thicket, a cry, weak, intermittent, like a muffled cry for help. He almost ignored it, thought about going on his way, but something made him look back, and it was in that look that everything changed. Curious and a little suspicious, he approached slowly. The vegetation was dense in some places, with dry branches, pieces of wood, and a lot of accumulated trash. The smell was strong, the humidity mixed with the odor of food remains and dirt. Even so, he continued forward, guided only by that insistent sound. As it got closer, the crying increased a little, as if the little ones felt that something, or someone, was nearby. And then he saw it, the first puppy, small, fragile, lying on a piece of dirty plastic, trying to crawl towards the warmth of its mother's body. Next to it, another struggled slightly, whimpering softly, and there in the middle of them she was, the dog, thin to the point of looking like a skeleton with skin, the sunken eyes, full of pain and tiredness, but incredibly alive, and the most distressing, the thick, dirty tape wrapped around her snout, squeezing tightly, deforming her expression, preventing her from opening her mouth. The man froze for a few seconds. The scene was too brutal to be understood immediately. He tried to assimilate what he saw, but his heart was racing. It wasn't just a wounded animal. It was a mother being prevented from doing what mothers do: feed, protect, defend. The tape was a calculated assault. There was no way it could have been an accident. Someone, at some point, chose to tie that dog's mouth shut. Someone left her there to die. But still, she stayed. She didn't run away. She didn't abandon it. The man's first reaction was a mixture of indignation and despair. He fumbled in his pocket for his cell phone with shaking hands. He called a local animal shelter, reporting in a choked voice what he had found. While waiting for help, he got closer. The dog didn't growl, didn't lunge, didn't try to bite. Even though she was hurt, exhausted, vulnerable, she didn't see that man as a threat. Her eyes just followed him as if asking, "Did you come to save me?" The next few minutes felt like hours. The man took off the shirt he was wearing over his tank top and laid it on the floor, trying to warm the puppies. He took a bottle of water and a packet of biscuits out of his backpack. That was all he had. He tried to give it to his mother, but she couldn't drink it. The tape was still there, suffocating, hurting, limiting, a silent and cruel crime. When the rescue team arrived, the impact was immediate. Everyone was shocked. One of the volunteers cried at the same time. She had never seen anything like this. The scene was worthy of a movie too sad to be true, and yet it was there, before his eyes. The timing of the removal was delicate. Dog needed to trust, needed to allow, but the most surprising thing was that she allowed it. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. Perhaps at that moment, she knew that the worst was over. Maybe she felt like, for the first time, someone was there for her. Someone wanted to help, and that alone was more than she could have expected. Very carefully, the tape was cut. There were wounds around the muzzle, deep marks, some already infected. She moaned softly as the pressure finally eased. But even so, his gaze remained firm. His focus was still different. The puppies. When she saw that they were being placed in a box with blankets, she moved her body with effort to get closer. "I wanted to see them, smell, make sure you were going along." And they were, all. For the first time since it all began, she and her children were being taken away from abandonment, pain, and the cold. It was the beginning of a new stage. There was still a long way to go, a lot of care, dressings, exams. But the most important thing had happened. Someone saw it, someone cared. And this is where we ask ourselves, how many stories like this go unnoticed every day? How many mothers like this dog are silenced by abandonment? How many animals are there, resisting in the invisible, waiting just for a look, an attitude, a gesture? The conflict in this story is not just physical, he is emotional. It's the clash between the cruelty of those who abandon and the courage of those who love anyway. It is the rupture that separates those who do harm from those who choose to care. And above all, it is the moment when pain stops being invisible, when someone sees, and taking action becomes inevitable. From that point on, the gears of destiny begin to turn. The story is no longer about a mother alone with her puppies. Now other people are involved, and each new presence, each gesture of compassion, each word spoken with care, all of this begins to transform what was once just suffering into a possible story of overcoming. But this transformation is still in its infancy, and like every new beginning, it requires faith, it demands hope, and it requires, above all, the presence of those who believe that no pain should be ignored. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person hearing a faint cry in the middle of the trash to completely change the fate of a life, or several. Have you ever felt that pain that isn't yours, but feels like it's going through your chest as if it were? That feeling of helplessness mixed with anger, that comes when we are faced with something so cruel that it is difficult to even believe. It was exactly this type of feeling that began to take hold of people as soon as the first images of the dog with her mouth sealed began to circulate on social media. And it wasn't just sadness. It was a scream stuck in the throat of someone who loves animals as part of the family. It was a wave of indignation that never stopped growing. The news spread quickly, as stories that touch the depths of the soul tend to do. The image of that thin mother, with her eyes sunken with exhaustion and pain, but still lying next to her puppies, protecting them with the little strength she had left, didn't need a caption. Just look. It was enough to feel it. Her suffering was clear, open, and it hurt everyone who had ever seen, in the eyes of an animal, more than simple instinct. Anyone who has ever been loved by a puppy knows what I'm talking about. You know that love. There isn't just anything, and that's what touched people, her courage, the delivery, the glaring injustice of it all. It was impossible not to revolt. It's impossible not to ask yourself, who would do this? Who would be capable of tying a mother's mouth, leaving her unable to feed, unable to bark, unable to defend herself, and still abandon her to her fate with her puppies by her side? The hatred of those who did this contrasted with the silent love of those who were victims, and it was this contrast that shocked, that caused widespread commotion. In the comments, it was clear people were crying together. "This breaks my heart," many said. Others wrote that they couldn't stop thinking about the scene, that they were praying for her, that they hoped for justice. Some talked about the dog they had already lost, reliving the pain of absence when they saw that mother suffering. The commotion was collective, people of all ages, from all corners, sharing the image, tagging friends, asking for help, wanting to do something, because that's what injustice does when it becomes visible. It provokes action, it mobilizes, and she turns silence into noise. And here it's important to remember something. She didn't ask for anything. The dog never howled in desperation to get attention. She didn't make a fuss. He didn't try to escape. She just resisted. She suffered in silence, not knowing that she would be seen, that anyone would care. And it was precisely this silence that screamed loudest. Because it's easy to ignore the noise. It's difficult to face silent pain which looks into our eyes and asks, without words, "Why me?" Her story became a symbol. Within days, shelters and NGOs started using his image to talk about mistreatment, to ask for donations, to denounce the neglect of abandoned animals. His photo ended up on news pages, TV articles, and animal protection groups. And each new view touched another person, another broken heart, another link in that invisible chain of people who don't accept that this is normal. And it really isn't. It can't be. A society that accepts this type of cruelty as part of everyday life is sick, because it's not just a puppy, as some still insist on saying. It's about empathy, humanity, recognizing that the pain of another, even that of a being who doesn't speak, matters. That cannot be ignored. That needs an answer. The feeling was of urgency. It was as if that story had the power to reveal so many others that remain hidden, as if her pain represented that of thousands of other animals that go through similar situations and are never seen. And maybe that was it. Maybe that mother was there to remind us of something that we forget in the midst of the rush, the selfishness, the indifference, that to love is also to rebel in the face of injustice. And don't think that the commotion was just on the networks. The shelter that received her began receiving visits, donations, and adoption proposals. People came from far and wide just to see her, to look into her eyes, to thank her for her resistance. Children brought toys, adults left food packages. Elderly people were moved by touching their heads and saying, "You won." Because deep down, everyone knew, she won. He overcame cruelty with love. He overcame violence with protection. He overcame abandonment with hope. But there was something more that people wanted. They wanted justice. They wanted answers. Who had done that? Why? The outrage was so great that campaigns began to emerge demanding an investigation, pressuring the authorities to act, and that made a difference. The commotion generated mobilization. The mobilization turned into pressure, and the pressure, as you will see later, began to bring results. Because that's what happens when a true, emotional, powerful story finds hearts willing to feel. It stops being just a story. It becomes movement. It becomes a cause. It becomes change. And at this point in the story, it's impossible not to think, how many other doges like her are still out there? How many other animals are suffering in silence without anyone hearing their muffled cries? Her pain had a voice because someone stopped to listen. But what about the others? This reflection moves us. It pokes us. It forces us to look closer, to pay more attention, because suffering doesn't always appear in viral videos. Sometimes he's there, next to the house, on the corner street, in that empty lot that you always pass by without looking, and maybe the next person to hear crying will be you. This brave mother's story is not over yet. Yes, she gained visibility, he gained care, he gained affection, but destiny, that master of surprises, still has something in store that will touch your heart even more, because when love insists on existing, even after everything, the impossible begins to show signs of coming. Have you ever had the feeling that someone very small, very silent, very forgotten, was fighting? A giant fight right before your eyes, that even without words, even without strength, even without almost anything, this someone continued to insist, like someone screaming with their soul, "It's not over yet, I'm still here." This is how we need to start seeing this dog. She who had everything against her, her weak body, her mouth sealed with a dirty tape, her dependent puppies, the cold of the morning, her oblivion of the world, still, she persisted, while many people would have given in to despair. She chose to remain. He chose to stay. He chose to fight for those who could not fight alone. Even in pain, even injured, even hungry, she kept digging. He used his paws as best he could to rummage through torn bags, boxes wet from the rain, dirty packaging, trying to find anything that could be chewed, any remains of food that could still be used to feed his puppies. She didn't eat, but they needed it, and that was enough. The most touching thing was that, even though she was weak, she never moved away from them. They slept together, pressed close together with their bodies curved, protecting the little ones like an instinctive blanket, one eye closed, the other always attentive, like someone who doesn't allow sleep to become vulnerability. Even there, among the trash and the earth, she was a constant presence, a safe haven, a guardian. Every time a cub moved, she moved with it, as if to say, "Don't worry, Mommy is here." And do you know what makes this story so strong? It's just that she could have run away. I could have left the puppies there and gone, looking for help, food, freedom, but she didn't do that. She chose to stay. And it wasn't for lack of survival instinct, it was because of an excess of love, out of loyalty, for that kind of love that we only see in those who really feel it in a pure, true animal way in the best of senses. But the world turns, and sometimes, when we least expect it, it makes noise. Video of that dog, taken by the man who found her, began to spread. At first a few likes here and there, then shares, emotional comments, people tagging others. The revolt, which at first was just a few, spread like wildfire. And that's when something happened. Among the shares, the video reached a group of animal protectors in the region, people used to difficult stories, last-minute rescues, traumas. But even for them, that scene was too much. One of them, in particular, was paralyzed when he saw it. Something about that dog seemed familiar to him. Those eyes, that insistent, strong look, even under so much pain. That's when he went to the shelter's records archive, and there she was, the same dog, same color, same markings on the body. She had been rescued months before, found abandoned on the side of a road. She had been treated, vaccinated, cared for with love. She was beautiful when she was adopted. But now he was there, in the nets, with his mouth sealed, his bones bouncing, fighting to keep his children alive. His heart sank. How could someone do that? How could someone take such a fragile being and return him to pain? And worse, she wasn't alone. She was with puppies. And yet, it was discarded as if it were trash. That's when the penny dropped. The adopter's name, noted in the registry, was not strange. He had already been reported before for mistreatment. The shelter at the time did not have enough evidence to deny the adoption. He seemed kind, polite, but now it all made sense. But the discovery hit everyone in the stomach like a punch. She wasn't just an abandoned dog. She was a survivor of a cycle of neglect, rescued once, adopted, mistreated again. And yet, she didn't give up. Even so, she did not lose the ability to love. This moment marked the first turning point in history, because from then on it stopped being just a sad case. It became a mission. The group organized itself immediately. One of them went to the place where she was, accompanied by veterinarians and volunteers, not only to rescue her permanently, but also to ensure that her puppies would have a different future, a worthy future. The reunion was heartbreaking. When the protector who had looked after her in the past came close, she recognized him. It didn't run. He didn't hide. His eyes, although weak, shone for an instant, As if, in the midst of so much darkness, a familiar light had shone again. He knelt down, slowly touched her head, and said softly, "I'm here, warrior. Now you're safe." She didn't have the strength to react, but he didn't need to. His delivery was enough. She allowed the touch, allowed care, and when she was placed inside the transport box, along with her puppies, she didn't fight. For the first time in a long time, she rested. Back at the shelter, he received all the necessary treatment, medications, special food, warm bath, soft blanket, but most importantly, affection, presence, respect. Their puppies were also welcomed with great care, evaluated by veterinarians, and quickly enchanted those who passed by. They were fragile, yes, but full of life, fruits of the mother's resistance, living proof that love is stronger than abandonment. And now, with all this happening, the story has taken a new turn. Because when pain is recognized and treated with dignity, it can transform into healing, and more than that, in inspiration. The dog, previously invisible, was now a symbol. He gained a name. He gained identity. He got a second chance. Have you ever had that feeling that something is finally getting done? That mix of relief and emotion when justice begins, even if little by little, to repair a pain that seemed forgotten. After so much sadness, so much indignation, so much silent struggle on the part of that warrior dog, what was about to happen was more than necessary. It was urgent, and it was, above all, deserved. Until that moment, what we had was a story of survival. A dog with her mouth sealed with dirty tape, abandoned in a vacant lot, fighting daily to keep her puppies alive. We already know her persistence, her tireless care for her little ones, her desperate gesture of digging for food even when she can't feed herself. We saw your strength, your delivery, and now the world saw it too. The video that had gone viral and the recognition by the protectors who identified the dog as being from a shelter caused the situation to take a new turn. I couldn't close my eyes anymore. Social networks had done their part. They amplified the pain and transformed suffering into mobilization. And this mobilization was now taking shape. I got an address. It won action. It was early, one of those mornings where the sky seems too heavy, as if it carries the tension of what is about to happen. The group of protectors was already ready, but this time they were not alone. Alongside them, environmental police vehicles and civil agents joined the mission. A formal complaint of mistreatment had been registered. The images, the reports, the shelter documents, everything was in the hands of the authorities, and it was time to act. The address of the dog's previous adopter was known. That was where the investigation pointed. The shelter volunteers didn't know exactly what they would find, but they all carried the same feeling in their hearts. She needed justice. Not just her, but all the animals that have been through similar situations and never had the same chance. That dog now represented an entire cause. Arrival at the location was silent. The neighborhood watched with curiosity. An old gate painted with graffiti, with rusty chains, hid a messy yard. There was a strong smell of feces and urine, clear signs of neglect. When they called, the man took a while to appear. And when he finally opened the gate, the surprise wasn't just his, it was everyone's. In front of them, without showing any remorse, he tried to act as if nothing was wrong, as if it were just another ordinary day. But it wasn't. The delegate was direct. He explained the reasons for the visit, showed the images, presented the documents, and faced with pressure, the man faltered. He tried to deny it, then he tried to minimize it. But when the police announced that he would be taken to the police station to give a formal statement, he remained silent. Perhaps for the first time, he understood the gravity of what he had done. While he was being taken away, the volunteers and police team entered the land. They looked for clues, for signs of other animals, for anything that would help them better understand what had happened there. They found old pots, some broken toys, moldy food remains. But most importantly, they found the puppies. Yes, the same ones. Still fragile, still scared but alive. In a corner of the yard, protected by pieces of dirty cloth, they trembled at the slightest noise. They were dirty, thin, but they were breathing, and close by, she was, lying down with her fragile body still trying to warm the little ones. Even after everything, even surrounded by abandonment, she still did what she did best: care. When she saw the familiar faces, the protectors who had once been with her, something in her eyes changed. It wasn't distrust. It wasn't fear. It was as if he was saying, "You're back, I knew you hadn't forgotten me." The approach was delicate. She was weakened, but her spirit remained strong. When the protector bent down and spoke to her, her body relaxed. She allowed her to be touched, to be wrapped in a clean blanket. He allowed the puppies to be placed in a heated box. He didn't cry. He didn't resist. She gave herself to the care with the confidence of someone who finally understood that she was safe. The rescue was carried out with great care. The dog and her puppies were taken directly to a veterinary clinic partner with the shelter. There they received their first care: exams, baths, controlled eating. The cubs, although malnourished, were out of danger, and she began little by little to rest. Meanwhile, the case gained momentum. The attacker was formally prosecuted for cruelty to animals, a crime provided for by law with penalties ranging from fines to imprisonment. The complaint was highlighted on news portals, generating a wave of support for the animal cause. Unknown people started sending messages to the shelter. They wanted to know how to help. They wanted to donate. They wanted to adopt. They wanted to be part of that story. And do you know what's most beautiful about all this? Justice, in this case, was not limited to punishing the guilty party. True justice came through care, reconstruction, the chance to start over. Because she, that dog who once had her voice silenced by tape, now had her story being told by thousands of people, people who did not accept silence, people who decided to listen. She got a name. He received a medical record. He got a corner with blankets and toys. He gained affection, attention, kind looks, but above all he gained dignity. And her cubs, who only knew the world through their mother's protective touch, now learned what it was like to live without fear. Have you ever heard of love without a blood tie? That kind of love that doesn't worry about origin, appearance, or similarity, but simply chooses to welcome, protect, care. Maybe you've even experienced this in some way. But when that kind of love comes from an animal, even more so from one who's been through everything this dog has been through, it becomes even more powerful, even more inspiring. And as if her story wasn't moving enough, life decided to give us yet another surprise. A twist like that makes us rethink everything we believe about empathy, instinct, and above all, what it really means to be a mother. The day of the rescue was marked by emotion and relief. Justice was beginning to be served. The dog and her puppies were finally safe, receiving care, being observed, treated with affection. There was, of course, a lot of concern about her health. The time of abandonment had taken its toll. The visible bruises, the severe malnutrition, the eyes tired from constant vigil. But it wasn't just that. During routine exams, something caught the veterinarian's attention. The dog showed clear signs of infection, high fever, increasing weakness, an internal inflammation that required immediate attention. It was as if her body, which until then had held itself together by sheer force of will, had finally allowed itself to rest, now that she knew the kits were safe. With the diagnosis confirmed, treatment with antibiotics and intensive care was started. The picture was delicate, but there was hope. While she was monitored, the puppies also underwent a series of exams and observations. One by one they were evaluated, weighed and hydrated. And it was there, in this meticulous care process, that one of the veterinarians, a specialist in animal behavior and development, noticed something. That made her frown. One of the puppies had a different pattern than the others. The coat was not the same, the features were slightly different, but what caught the most attention was something else: age. In the eyes of most, the puppy would go unnoticed among its siblings. Small, needy, shrunken, like everyone else. But when analyzed more carefully, it became clear that he was a little younger. His eyes were still partially closed, his motor development delayed compared to the others. It was a subtle detail, which perhaps only someone very attentive would notice, and it was noticed. Intrigued, the veterinarian pulled up the data. He checked the reports, compared records, performed quick tests, and the realization arrived like a breath of emotion. That puppy was not the dog's biological son. He was younger. He had no blood connection with her. He was in some way an intruder, an adopted child. But then, how was he there? Who placed him with the others? And more importantly, why did she accept him? It was impossible not to go back in time, revisit the rescue scene, Remember the image of that mother bending over her puppies, protecting them all with her body, licking them with the same affection, warming them with the same dedication. She had never made a distinction. He never treated that puppy as different. He was, from the beginning, another one who needed her, and that was enough. She welcomed him, nursed him, protected him, even without having generated it. The revelation deeply touched the entire team. That mother who had already lost everything, who was hurt, silenced, abandoned, still chose to welcome one more. Someone who had probably also been rejected, left to fend for himself. Maybe she found it there on the same ground. Maybe he heard her crying among the rubble, and seeing him so small, so defenseless, he couldn't ignore it. Because a heart like hers doesn't measure blood, it measures need. And love, in the hearts of dogs, is not calculated. It is offered. And the most moving thing is that even though she was so weak, even though she was fighting an infection, even with her body exhausted by malnutrition, she did not hesitate to share the little she had with that orphaned puppy. He shared milk, warmth, protection. He took a risk. It opened up space. She became the mother of a son who was not hers, but who now, in her eyes, was part of her world, her instinct, her mission. When this story began, we already knew we were dealing with a special dog. But with each new chapter it became even bigger. More than one survivor, more than a warrior. She revealed herself as a symbol of everything that is purest and most generous in animals. Because there is no ego, there is no judgment, there is no pride, there is only care, there is only love. The news of her adoption quickly spread among the volunteers and followers of the shelter's page. The video of the moment in which veterinarians explained the discovery was watched by thousands of people. Emotional comments, tears, applause, people saying they had learned more from her than from many humans. Because in fact, what kind of human being, after so much suffering, can still welcome another in pain? She did it, without expecting anything in return, not knowing if I would have the strength to continue. It just did, because for her, a suffering puppy would never be left behind. And it's impossible not to pause, take a deep breath, and reflect. How many times, out of pride, out of fear, out of tiredness, do we stop helping those in need? How many times do we choose to walk away when we should welcome? This dog, who had absolutely nothing, chose to share everything. And in this simple but giant gesture, she taught us about empathy, solidarity, and the true essence of motherhood. Meanwhile, the puppies recovered, including the little adopted, who started to receive extra attention from the team. But the greatest affection continued to come from her. Even in treatment, even under medical care, the dog insisted on having them close by. With each encounter, with each lick, she made it clear, no matter the past, you are mine now. And it was at that moment, in this piece of history that seemed small, but was immense, that a new light came on. Because sometimes what changes everything isn't the grand gesture. It's the small gesture full of greatness. A gesture that comes from someone who could have given up, but chose to love again. Love beyond the pain. Love beyond the blood bond. The road to recovery would still be long. The case against the attacker was still ongoing, but none of this was stronger than what was now evident. That dog, who had already been rejected by so many, had become a mother by choice. And that choice changed everything. Have you ever found yourself thinking about how some encounters seem to be written before they even happen? How do certain souls recognize each other, even if they have never seen each other before? The story of the dog who survived abandonment, pain, and the cruel silence of a ribbon tying her snout seemed to have already shown us enough. She had already taught us what unconditional love is, what persistence and surrender are. But life, with its mysterious way of sewing the threads of destiny, still had one more chapter to make us believe, truly, that hope has a smell, a touch, a look, and sometimes a cold nose. After the discovery that one of the puppies was not biologically his, but had nevertheless been adopted and cared for as if he were, the atmosphere at the shelter changed. That dog wasn't just another rescue story. She transformed herself day after day into a symbol, a living portrait of what human beings need to relearn, that love does not need justification, that care does not choose similar faces, that true motherhood lives in the heart, not in the womb. Everyone there was emotionally involved, But there was someone among the rescuers who seemed to feel deeper. It was the veterinarian who followed each stage of the dog's recovery. Young but marked by experiences that had left deep scars. Not long ago, she had lost her four-legged companion, an elderly dog with whom she shared an entire decade of love, comfortable silence and sunset walks. The pain of loss was still fresh, alive, and that's why, when she looked into the rescued dog's eyes, she felt something she couldn't name. But I felt it. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't just compassion. It was such an intense identification that it seemed as if a part of the injured dog's soul spoke directly to hers. In each gesture of care, in each exchange of glances, something new blossomed. A bond, a reunion of hopes. As if both woman and dog were hurt in different ways, but were silently seeking the same thing, to continue. Little by little, the veterinarian became more than a professional. She became a constant presence. He would arrive early, stay after work, caress him, carefully speak softly in the dog's ear while applying medication, like someone singing to calm her down. And over time, the answer came. The dog, who initially had a suspicious look, began to truly rest when she was nearby. I slept better. I ate more. I accepted lap. And for the first time, he wagged his tail. It was at that moment that everyone there understood. That connection was no longer just therapeutic. It was love in the making. A new chapter for both of them. A chance to start over. With the shelter's approval and the legal procedures resolved, the news came that made everyone excited. The veterinarian would adopt the dog, not as a charitable gesture, but as a choice. As if to say, I needed you too. Because yes, rescue dogs also rescue, and sometimes they are the ones who save our broken pieces, not the other way around. The new house was not grand, but it had everything a hurting heart needs. Security, comfortable silence, fresh water, fragrant food, and, most importantly, presence. In the first few days, the adaptation was done calmly. The dog was still sleeping with her eyes half open, as if she were afraid that it was all a dream. But the routine, the familiar smells, the soft voice of the woman who was now his new guardian were building trust. And with it came relief. Rest came, peace came, and the puppies, they also found the path to happiness. The shelter, which was becoming known due to the repercussion of the story, received a wave of adoption requests, people from everywhere wanting to welcome those little ones who had survived abandonment and the cold thanks to their mother's courage. But the process was careful. Each puppy was given to families who understood the value of their stories. Families who were ready to offer not just a home, but love, time, patience, and care. The adopted puppy, the one who was not born to her, but was raised as her son, also found a special home. And the name he received was a tribute, Hope. And as if all this wasn't enough to rekindle faith in the world, the shelter decided to turn this story into movement. With the dog's face printed on posters, t-shirts, and digital campaigns, a national project to raise awareness against abuse was born. Her image, with her deep eyes and her expression of serene strength, came to represent all the silenced, ignored, discarded animals. Social media exploded with support. Similar stories began to emerge. People who found strength in her story to report, to adopt, to help. The name of the campaign, She Stayed. In reference to the moment when she, even though she could run away, chose to stay with her puppies, even though she was injured, even though she was forgotten. She became a symbol. But more than that, it became a living reminder that there is still goodness, there is still redemption, there is still room for good. Because at the end of the day, this story isn't just about a rescued dog. It's about bonds that form when you least expect them. It's about the power of care. It's about scars that become marks of overcoming. And even if time passes, even if the spotlight changes location, what remains of this story will not be erased. The image remained of her lying next to the puppies. It was time for rescue. The vet cried when she took her home. I was certain that love, even when it arrives hurt, is still capable of transforming everything. Have you ever noticed how some gestures speak louder than 1,000 words? How do certain looks carry entire stories that not even time can erase? After everything this dog has experienced, the abandonment, the silent pain of the tape glued to her snout, the cold of the early mornings, the weight of feeding and protecting an entire litter, even without the strength, she still leaves us with something more, something you don't see, but you feel, a lesson. She had no voice to ask for help. He didn't have the strength to bark, much less to defend himself. She was immobilized, injured, invisible, and yet she chose to stay. She chose to be sheltered when she herself had no shelter. He chose to give love when all he received was cruelty. He chose to protect, welcome, and even adopt a puppy that wasn't his. All of this, shut up, but with a screaming heart. The truth is that true love, the one that expects no return, that demands no recognition, that simply, and no words needed, it expresses itself in constant presence, even when tired, in silent care, even in pain, in the persistence of fighting for others, even when no one fights for you. That's the kind of love she lived, and that's the kind of love she taught us. How many times in the rush of life do we forget that the essential is simple? How many times do we get caught up in beautiful words and forget about sincere gestures? That dog didn't talk, but he taught. He didn't complain, but he resisted. He didn't ask, but it inspired. She showed us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is continuing, even in fear. It's loving, even without guarantees. It's caring, even when injured. And in the end, this is what remains. Not suffering, but overcoming. Not injustice, but a fresh start. Not pain, but love. Because even without a voice, she said everything. And anyone who truly loves animals, anyone who has ever looked into a dog's eyes and seen an entire universe of feelings there, knows the language of love is not in speech, it's in the gesture, in the look, in the heart. This story is hers, but in a way it is also ours, because she reminds us that there is always room for more love, that we can always do more, feel more, care more, and that, even when everything seems lost, a heart willing to love can change destinies. She chose to love, and we choose to learn from it. Stories like this touch you deeply, right? It's as if, for a few minutes, the world outside stopped, and we were reminded of what really matters. The love that endures, the care that transforms, the strength that comes from the heart even when everything seems lost. And if this video moved you in some way, then it fulfilled its purpose, to remind you that there are still true feelings that are worth spreading. Now this feeling can also reach more people. A simple click on like helps this message go further, touching other hearts that also need to feel what you felt here. And when you sign up, you open the way to continue living these stories with us. And the next one, I guarantee you, will make your heartbeat even faster. There's something happening behind the scenes, and what's coming has everything to be the channel's most exciting video yet. Meanwhile, leave a word in the comments that represents what this story awakened in you. He writes, courage. If you believe that true love is the one that chooses to stay, even when everything is against it, it will be beautiful to see this feeling spreading among those who also truly love animals. And now, just look at the next video that's on your screen.